Hi there and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashi Capellos in Ottawa on this Wednesday. Tonight, the Prime Minister and Pierre Poilievre's tete-a-tete.
We're the ones trying to hit the gas pedal. My message to Mr. Carney, stop hitting the brakes.
The two leaders sit down to talk cross-partisan collaboration from domestic to international issues. It's a rare face-to-face between the two politically opposing leaders. We're going to have the latest on what happened in that meeting coming up. Plus, our front bench with Sharon Carr, Laura D'Angelo, Jamie Ellerton, and Sebastian Scampsi will be here to talk about the politics of it all. Then, a Conservative MP's mission to D.C.
Mr. LeBlanc gave a briefing to Mr. Jivani, who I don't believe is the trade critic for the opposition, certainly not the Minister of International Trade.
Jivani is on a solo trade mission to Washington this week. He's a longtime friend of U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. Can he leverage that to move the needle on trade with the U.S.? That story is coming up. And as Trump's tariffs dig in, Canada expands out.
We are at a time where the trading system that we prospered under for many, many years is gone.
Energy Minister Tim Hodgson is just back from a trip to India in an effort to diversify where Canada sends its exports. If Canada sends more oil to India, what does that mean for a new pipeline? I'll ask the minister in moments. First, though.
On the one hand, there's working to fast-track results for affordability, safety, and security, and asking tough questions to hold the government to account. The latter is not going to stop. We're going to keep holding the government accountable for high grocery costs, out-of-control crime, broken immigration, and our weak economy, which economists say is on life support. That at the same time, we can walk and chew gum, and that means we're going to work today. I'm going to say to the Prime Minister, let's work together to fast-track results for an affordable, safe, self-reliant economy.
A somewhat rare face-to-face meeting between Prime Minister Mark Carney and Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. The two leaders, who are presenting a new collaborative tone when it comes to facing threats from the U.S., met this afternoon for about 30 minutes. As you heard in that clip ahead of the meeting, Poilievre says Carney is holding up progress on domestic issues and is pushing the Prime Minister to fast-track bills, while also saying his party will work with the Liberals on the Canada-U.S. trade front. A senior government source tells CTV News before the meeting the Prime Minister is seeking collaboration from the opposition, including on the Budget Implementation Act and crime legislation. Now, both leaders have released readouts. Neither of them, however, has spoken to reporters after the meeting. The spirit of collaboration is being offered in light of the economic threat we face through the United States. Part of the government's efforts to counter that means they're looking for new places to send Canadian exports, including oil and gas. Energy Minister Tim Hodgson was with the Prime Minister on his recent trip to China and just got back from a visit to India. Hi, Minister. Pleasure to welcome you back to the program. Thank you very much for making the time.
Pleasure to be here, Vashi.
I know you're coming back fresh from a couple of pretty significant trips, and I wanted to start off on one of them, the most recent one to India. When you were there, I listened to a press conference that you gave where you said that your impression was India would welcome the opportunity to buy more Canadian oil and gas. It appears like they've recently agreed through a deal with the United States to stop importing Russian oil. Is there more opportunity for Canadian crude to supplant that supply?
Well, what I heard loud and clear when I was in India is, and maybe I'll start by saying something I learned while I was over there. India has the largest refinery industry in the world. They also have the largest refineries in the world. Today, they are buying Canadian crude in rather small quantities off the West Coast through the TMX pipeline, but they're buying larger amounts of Canadian crude off the Gulf Coast. It would clearly be cheaper for them to buy more off of our West Coast. And I can tell you that the Indian refiners that I spoke to really like our product, and they would like to buy more.
How much additional export capacity do you believe might be necessary to see the full promise of what you kind of heard there actually realized?
You know, India is quite hungry for more energy. I heard loud and clear they would take as much additional crude as we could supply.
Does that, in principle, reasonably lead to an argument for an additional pipeline? And I'm removing from this the debate about when the proponent comes forward and all that kind of stuff. Just in principle, based on your experience in both India and China, I think I can ask, like, does that in principle support the idea of additional export capacity through another pipeline?
So what I heard from many companies in India is they would like to buy more of our conventional oil. They would like to buy more of our natural gas, our LNG. They would like to buy more of our LPG, which they use for clean cooking. There are 380 million households in India that use LPG. This is a new export for Canada. We've just started exporting it. We have tremendous opportunity to grow that. So the answer is yes, there is certainly opportunity to sell more, but there's opportunity to sell many products, including critical minerals, including metallurgical coal, including potash, including uranium. They are very keen to do more business with Canada.
I ask more specifically about pipeline, and I know you'll be well familiar with this because the other products that you list are not nearly as politically divisive here within Canada. And so I'll maybe rephrase the question. So you say yes, that there is an appetite for all of that. Does that in principle mean that the federal government sees an appetite for an additional pipeline?
So assuming we build in an environmentally responsible way, and we do it with the support of First Nations, I believe there is demand for additional natural gas, LPG, and conventional oil. There's also demand for critical minerals. There's also demand for potash. There's also an incredible opportunity to exchange capabilities with respect to renewables. What the Chinese and the Indian are doing in the way of baseload renewables is quite amazing. And we've got some real opportunities to take some of the technology and bring it here to develop our resources. At the same time, they look at many of our clean tech companies, particularly in the area of CCUS, and see a real opportunity to take that technology there. So there's many opportunities for us to work together.
And like I said, I take your point on all of that. That's the stuff that's the end half of what you said is the stuff that's very politically palatable, that's easy to find support across the country. The former subject, that of a pipeline, is less so. And I wondered if you could also comment, Minister, on sort of providing investors, potential proponents, let's say, with the level of assuredness that might be required given all that's going on. And I'll provide you with a few examples that I know you're well aware of, but so that our listeners are as well. We've got opposition from the Premier of British Columbia, perhaps the most punctuated opposition politically. But we also have a number of other factors, including Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith saying that if this doesn't go ahead, it's going to be hugely nationally divisive. A whole bunch of stuff, basically politically. How would you respond to that?
So the Prime Minister and the premiers have all been together as recently as last week. We all agree that we need to work together to find ways to grow our economy and do it in a way that is respectful for the environment, and do it in partnership with First Nations and Indigenous peoples in general. There's lots of work to do. That's why you've got a team in the federal government, a team in the Alberta government, a team in the British Columbia government working hard to execute against the MOU, the work streams in the MOU. It's going to take lots of work, but this is a great country. And if we all work together, we will find positive paths forward.
Do you think investors can be assured that your government says what it means? I recently interviewed Gregor Robertson, the Minister of Housing and Infrastructure, who used to be very opposed to pipeline development in the form of TMX, and I read just part of the MOU to him about an exemption of the tanker ban and asked him if he was supportive of the exact language in the MOU. I asked him probably 4 times, and he could not unequivocally say yes, he was. I think it's understandable. I know you're a newer minister. You weren't in the last government, but given the record of the last government, the rhetorical way that they framed this issue, it does feel hard to believe the kinds of things that you're saying the government is now about, given particularly the presence of some of those ministers still around, those people still around the cabinet table. Does your government mean what it says? Like, will you act on that?
What our government is committed to is if we build in an environmentally responsible way and we do it in partnership with First Nations, we will have the support, the social license to build. I want to come back to where we are in the world right now. We are, as the Prime Minister said in Davos, we are at a rupture. We are at a time where the trading system that we prospered under for many, many years is gone. And we need to rebuild our economy in the face of a trading partner who is now charging for access to that market. That's a very challenging world that the Prime Minister described in Davos, but he did provide a path forward, a solution. That path forward is to build new trading links and new trading partners, which requires new infrastructure. And if we do that, Canada will be stronger than ever. So we have a challenge in front of us, but we have an opportunity. And I think Canadians will rise to that opportunity.
I want to also ask, just to conclude, about another trading partner, another visit that you were on, the trip to China. And in particular, your approach moving forward to Chinese investment or lack thereof potentially in the oil patch. I remember years ago covering the CNOOC and Nexen deal, the rules that came into place about Chinese state-owned companies and how much they could own. They could not basically have a majority stake, only under exceptional circumstances. You've signed an MOU kind of, in general terms, talking about more two-way back and forth investment. Can I ask you bluntly, Minister, will your government's, red line be the same thing?
We will calibrate our engagement with China. We are open to additional investment in the energy sector by China. We will use the same tests we always use. Is it a net benefit for Canada?
This is a little different, though, than just any kind of calibration. This is a country that 7 months ago the Prime Minister identified as the biggest security risk to Canada. I'm asking specifically about state-owned companies, investing a majority stake of companies operating in the oil patch. Are you saying that that isn't impossible under your government?
There's a difference between an investment and a majority investment. First of all, I will point out that a Chinese company is a minority investor in LNG Canada 1. And it's done in an appropriate way, and it's a net benefit to Canada. We'll look at each particular situation and decide whether it's a net benefit for Canada. That's why we have the Investment Canada Act.
But the rules, I take your point on the difference. The rules as established after CNOOC and Nexen were about a majority stake. And there was a very distinct red line drawn. Am I to interpret from what you're saying that you'll instead evaluate things on a case-by-case basis, despite the way that the Prime Minister characterized China just 7 months ago?
We will look at every investment from every country against the Investment Canada Act, and we will accept investments that are a net benefit to Canada.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Appreciate your time as always, Minister. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Federal Energy Minister Tim Hodgson. Coming up on Power Play, Conservative MP Jamil Jivani, a longtime friend of U.S. Vice President, J.D. Vance, is in Washington this week on a bit of a solo trade mission. We're about to talk about that with our front bench. Sharon Carr, Laura D'Angelo, Sebastian Skamsky, and Jamie Ellerton. Everyone look at the camera. They'll be with me in just 2 moments. Stay right there.
We have extensive contacts with the U.S. administration, constant contacts with the U.S. administration. Minister LeBlanc gave a briefing to Mr. Jivani, who I don't believe is the trade critic for the opposition, certainly not the Minister of International Trade.
Mr. Carney had promised that he would get us a deal by last July. My message to him today is Conservatives are here to work with the Prime Minister and with the government to knock down these unjust tariffs and fight for our workers, fight for their jobs, and fight for our economic independence.
Reaction there to Conservative MP Jamil Jivani's trip to Washington this week, where he says he's meeting with stakeholders about the Canada-U.S. relationship. The Ontario MP is a longtime close friend of U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, having met him while they were both students at Yale Law School. As you heard there, Prime Minister Carney says Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc did brief the Conservative MP before his departure. Jivani says he believes he can help the Liberals on the trade front, insisting it's not a partisan issue.
USMA and trade with the United States is so important to the Canadian economy and to our future as an independent, self-reliant nation that Conservatives and Liberals don't need to fight over this at all. In fact, we need to work together. The leader of the Conservative Party, Pierre, has said as much. He has offered help from Conservatives to the Liberal government on this issue, and I'm acting on that.
CTV News has asked Jivani's team about who exactly he will be meeting with this week, and we have not yet received a response. Our front bench is here to talk about all of that. Sharon Carr is a CTV News political analyst. She's former Deputy Chief of Staff to former Finance Minister Bill Morneau. Next to her, that's Jamie Ellerton. He's the principal at Kanaptis and worked for Minister Jason Kenney during the Harper government. Sebastian Scampsky was former Director of Media Relations to Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. And here with me in studio, Laura D'Angelo is with Enterprise Canada and previously worked in Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's office. Hi, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Good to see you. So, Laura, everybody sounds there like, hey, no biggie, this is okay. You know what I mean? What do you make of Mr. Jivani kind of heading there on what appears to be, yes, briefed by Minister LeBlanc, doesn't appear to be like sent by the Conservative Party. So what do you think's up here?
Doesn't appear he was sent by anyone but himself. This is not without risk. We know that Donald Trump looks for cracks in governments and countries and political movements in other parts of the world and then uses them to exploits them to get what he wants. And so an MP going down on his own with relationships that we all know about to try to talk on Canada's behalf without knowing what's happening behind the scenes really is not without risk here, and is something that Canadians should actually be concerned by. There does have to be a coordinated effort around this.
It's interesting because, and to be fair to Mr. Jivani, Jamie, for a while now, he's been saying, hey, I'm offering to do this. He spoke to my colleague Jeremy Charron at the Conservative Convention over the weekend and said, I've reached out to the Prime Minister's office. I've made overtures. I do have this relationship I could leverage. I am willing to do so. I haven't heard back. He obviously did hear from Minister LeBlanc. What do you think about kind of going it on your own?
Probably a bit unique. I think a lot of people understandably have some skepticism as to whether or not this is Jamil Jivani being a team player or if this is just a Jamil Jivani comm stunt. I think when you look at the reality of that relationship, MPs go abroad down to the U.S. all the time, and normally it doesn't make news. The only reason this one really is because of his known quite close personal relationship with Vice President J.D. Vance. And so when you kind of look at how this story broke yesterday and to where all the parties are now in their messaging today, the general consensus seems to be like, why not? We'll see where this goes. But I think everyone's going to wait and see. And I think for Jamil Jivani, here's a guy who has really kind of made a name for himself as someone with very strong opinions. He likes to engage in the culture war debates and has kind of really built his career on that. And he kind of almost reminds me of AOC when she first was elected to Congress. Did really well in the socials, had a clear following in a constituency outside of her own actual district. But her ability to get things done in Congress and actually work with the levels of power to actually enact change and feel like you're accomplishing something beyond posting to social media took her a while. And so I think part of what you're seeing here is the maturation of Jamil Jivani. What comes out of that? Sometimes these meetings are literally just photo ops and essentially some dinner reservations on the side, and other times they're substantive. And so I think we'll need to see what the proof is in the receipts. But given that line of communication, we also know that with diplomatic channels, sometimes they're both are official and unofficial channels. And if this helps give the Canadian government access that they're otherwise shut out of in that orbit, I think it's probably potentially a net positive for Canada.
Yeah, I guess overall you hope that he would meet with his friend, his old friend, J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, and that there would be something positive that emerges from that meeting. I know there's some, commentary out there that meeting did take place. We don't, like we said off the top, we reached out to his team. Hopefully we get a message back kind of confirming or establishing what meetings were taken. Sharon, your thoughts on the trip in general and the potential out of it?
You know, I really want to say that this was done in some sort of good faith to try to come to some agreement between our two countries. But this is clearly nothing but a PR stunt. This is purely for the cameras. It's purely for the exposure. And it's purely a tactic that Jamil Jivani is using. He does not speak for the government. He does not represent the government. He is not part of any negotiating team. And we know that he has this relationship. It's no secret that he has this relationship, but he has not proven himself to be someone who is willing to put aside politics to do what is best for the country. So politics is always going to come first. He is a member of the opposition party, so whatever helps him is purely for a PR stunt here. Now, I think that there is merit in having relationships with counterparts in the government, but not when it's at the risk of politicizing it so that it backfires in some way, shape, or form. So this was not sanctioned by the government. This is purely a PR stunt.
Yeah, it's interesting because I am old enough to remember, Sebastian, the first round of NAFTA negotiations where there were, premiers and members of parliament, all sorts of different people from different backgrounds who were making an effort to present the Team Canada case. But at the time, it also was coordinated. So I sort of see both sides of this coin. I'm not sure why the government has decided not to lean on the relationship that he has or try and exploit it and I don't mean that in a negative way, but try to leverage it to some use. At the same time, it is interesting that one would go there when the stakes are so high without the backing of so-called Team Canada. Uh-oh, I think you're on mute.
Oh.
Whatever it is you're saying. Oh, there you are. We missed the first part. Please repeat. No, we still don't have you. I'm so sorry. I don't know what's going on. Hopefully.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Okay, now we have you. My apologies.
Okay.
Back. We're going to re-rack and start the whole thing again. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I was just wanting to say, reject the premise really Sharon had laid out. I think Mr. Jivani explained in a 5-minute long video about why it is that he is going down to the States and, how it is that he wants to kind of inflict some positive change in that relationship. We all know that politics are a relationship sport. They are based on who you know, how well you know them. And so it is a pretty good card to have in your deck, to have been the roommate of the now vice president, who is, in our understanding, involved intimately in a lot of President Trump's decision-making. I'll also point out, of course, that Mr. Jivani represents a community that has been badly affected by the shortcomings of the Prime Minister in being able to secure a deal. We just saw GM, the Oshawa plant there, announce hundreds of workers that they plan to lay off. I think this is a kind of his response is one to be patriotic, is one to advocate for those workers. Yes, he is not a member of the governing party, but that does not mean that he is not obviously concerned about his constituents and the impact of the lack of action on this very important file by the federal government and how that's affecting his community.
What do you make? Split the difference for us, Laura. Where do you fall?
This is a PR stunt to me. I hear Seb, Jamil Jivani's riding has been hit brutally hard by job loss, largely as a result of the trade war, which falls squarely on Donald Trump's shoulders. Jamil Jivani also hasn't been out talking about that. That's not something we hear from him all that often. We don't hear him advocating for those workers or pushing really hard on the companies that did those layoffs. What we hear is that he's going down to the U.S. on an unsanctioned trip without knowing enough about what's happening to advocate for Canada without proper briefing and proper support to ensure that we can actually move that forward.
Jamie, last word to you. I would say two things are true sort of at the same time. There isn't the support, there isn't the sort of Team Canada backing. At the same time, I would say it's fair to say that the Conservatives have gone very hard on the government for the types of arrangements that they made with those companies that ended up turning around and going to the United States. So I take your point that there are other approaches you could take, but I would say it's not totally fair to say that the Conservatives haven't talked about those job losses.
Yeah, I think I would encourage my Liberal panelists here today to be more magnanimous like the Prime Minister and see what he does, see what he says, and see what he comes back with. I think if you are going to change and genuinely offer to help, you need to really sustain that over weeks and months. And if this is the opening of a negotiation, great. We all know President Trump makes his own decisions. Yes, he's got people in his ear. But frankly, I think overstating J.D. Vance's power in trade negotiations is also somewhat delusional. And so I think the Prime Minister's response here to be magnanimous, let him go down, see what it opens, and see what avenues it creates could possibly quite be a net benefit for Canada without overstating the significance of how instrumental this could potentially be either.
I was worried that the facial expressions from Sharon would not compare to when Seb is sitting next to her, but they're still producing, so I can take a quick commercial break. All four of our front bench panelists will be back after that break. We're going to talk about this tete-a-tete between Prime Minister Mark Carney and Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. Speaking of getting along to go along. Back in a moment.
On the one hand, there's working to fast-track results for affordability, safety, and security, and asking tough questions to hold the government to account. The latter is not going to stop. We're going to keep holding the government accountable for high grocery costs, out-of-control crime, broken immigration, and our weak economy, which economists say is on life support. That at the same time, we can walk and chew gum, and that means we're going to work today. I'm going to say to the Prime Minister, let's work together to fast-track results for an affordable, safe, self-reliant economy.
It was a cross-partisan tete-a-tete in Ottawa this afternoon with Prime Minister Mark Carney and Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre meeting face-to-face up on Parliament Hill. It's the first meeting between the two leaders in 2026, and it lasted about 30 minutes. Poilievre had posted a video on X Monday afternoon where he said he was seeking an urgent meeting with the Prime Minister to bring, quote, practical solutions and openness to hear other ideas and work together to fast-track results. The Prime Minister's office, meanwhile, said in a statement to CTV News earlier this week that Carney was looking forward to meeting with opposition party leaders to discuss their priorities as this new sitting progresses. So sort of saying it was more of a de rigueur, regular thing that was happening, and that they met with, the Prime Minister rather met with the interim leader of the NDP, Don Davies, last week. Our front bench is here to talk about the political stakes of the meeting this afternoon. Sharon Carr, Laura D'Angelo, Jamie Ellerton, and Sebastian Skamsky are all back. Sharon, I'll start with you on this one. And I will point out both, no reporters allowed in to take any pictures in there or any video, but both men's offices have posted photos and readouts. That's the new cool word, readout. Everyone's putting out a readout about what happened here. The readouts don't say a lot. We'll get into them in a second. But what do you think? Why do you think this happened now, Sharon?
Well, it's interesting to hear Poilievre's team's statement on it. It was actually the Prime Minister who requested the meeting, not only with Poilievre, but with other opposition leaders, but it was at the request of the Prime Minister. I think part of this might have to do with the fact that there's all this rumor of an election coming, and I think the tone and tenor we're seeing from Mr. Poilievre is him trying to seem like he's working with the government and not to come off as aggressive and defensive and divisive. So it's interesting to see how he's actually trying to make it appear so that he's going to work together. Now, there are shared mutual areas of interest, things like bail reform, tougher crime penalties, cost of living, affordability, all these things. But if you looked at the picture that both offices put out, it was there was a lot of space between the two, and I was going to make some sort of heated rivalry comment here, but I'm not going to do it and butcher it. But it didn't seem like a super warm and fuzzy, just more of a kind of had to do it type of meeting.
I don't know. They're smiling in this picture that I think this is the one that Mr. Poilievre's office put out. Correct me if I'm wrong, in the control room. And in the other one, Sebastian, they are the photos released by the offices certainly don't look necessarily unfriendly. Why do you think politically both individuals would want to have this meeting at this moment in time, Seb?
Well, I think on the Prime Minister's part, he, despite his best efforts, remains in a minority position. So he probably wants to secure some support on key planks of his winter agenda. I think on the part of Mr. Poilievre, since the convention really kicked off by the convention speech, I think Mr. Poilievre has shown Canadians that he is really a prime minister in waiting, that patriotism is kind of the leading virtue of with which he is guided, and that he's going to work with even a Liberal government, a Prime Minister who has failed Canadians to, on the edges and on some of the issues of overlap, create a common space and to make sure that those things are pushed ahead so that Canadians, in the end, in the interim, while we are stuck with this Liberal government, nonetheless suffer less. And I think we're going to see that again around issues that affect Canadians most on the domestic file.
I sort of see the politics of this as well, Laura, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it. From a multitude of perspectives, I don't think anyone wants to take the blame for forcing an election, even if one party stands to benefit at this moment in time more than the other. I do feel like there is concern about voters punishing whoever is seen, whichever party is seen, to be pushing for an election. And I do think in the case of Mr. Poilievre, and we interviewed at length Steve Outhouse, the campaign manager, a few days ago here, who was very, specific about saying, yes, this is... we do concede that there's, issues around tone and that kind of thing. And this is part of us, sort of putting forward overtures to show that, we aren't just about opposing everything.
Certainly no one right now wants to be the person or the party to send the country to an election. I don't think there's a Canadian that really wants that right now. And so there is a certain amount of this that is both sides ensuring Canadians know we are collaborative and working together. I also question some of that collaboration. I really hope it's true. There are really big things that have to get through Parliament and get through committee to be able to even happen and come into law and be legislated. So I hope that he means it. I think there are little signs that maybe this is more of a tone shift and less of a substantive shift. I think he said on who requested the meeting. It's been reported now,
good point.
Right? It's
kind
been reported now in multiple outlets that it was the PM first, and then there's a tweet that it isn't, and a little ridiculous. We also saw today that, Pierre Poilievre showed up to a 1:30 meeting at 1:30 p.m. and scrummed for 11 minutes. And so if the Prime Minister hadn't then extended the meeting on the other end, Pierre Poilievre would have had 20 minutes of his 30-minute meeting with the Prime Minister. And that's not exactly a sign of collaboration. Now it's also a scrum, so who knows what that means. But there are signals that maybe this is more of a political game and less of actual collaboration working for Canadians.
The easiest way to quash that kind of possibility, Jamie, would be for there to be stuff in the coming weeks that they say, okay, X, Y, and Z is what we are going to actually advance together. And Pierre Poilievre, in his original letter, had put forward, some of the legislation around diversifying trade, approving trade deals, for example. It ended up being the GST rebate boost. There's a few, the crime legislation, the bail reform. There's some opportunity for everybody to say, hey, we meant what we said.
Yeah, I think the politics of this are quite interesting. I think they both benefit from having this meeting today. For Mark Carney, you get to see you're the Prime Minister, you're meeting with leaders, you're trying to make a minority parliament work. And for Pierre Poilievre, I think if you look at where the Conservatives are at right now, they clearly need to make up more support amongst the people who don't currently think they'll ever vote Conservative, who otherwise would have been open to it in the past. And I think this helps advance that. I don't think you'll ever get the gratification of hearing them call this a pivot, but I do think in terms of the substance of how they're going to go about it, this is a chance for it to work. I think how often have you heard Conservatives on your show or in the House of Commons in recent months talk about all the ideas that Mark Carney is enacting that they say were authored by Conservatives originally? And so that to me says there's a mega majority in Parliament, a very super majority working coalition that could move fast and get a lot of things done if they actually just work together and put their swords down, as opposed to just constantly thinking about whatever the next election is going to be. And so I'm not going to try and be naive about this. Obviously, this is political parties. This is Ottawa. That's never going to be more than the third question away in terms of what comes next. But there's actually a real opportunity here to do what Canadians want this Parliament to do and get the job done. And for Pierre Poilievre, any day you get to control a message of showing you're working with the government constructively on issues while also offering some critiques, they can do that. I think to pick up on Laura's point, Vash, I don't need to tell you, anyone in Ottawa can walk past a scrum whenever they want. The fact that he did that for 11 minutes, said he wanted to give a message out, and very much was part of the exercise and showing that he's trying to do what he can in Parliament to, while holding the government account, find a way to deliver for Canadians and make this Parliament work.
And the ultimate message that they seem to have pivoted to, Sharon, is one of saying to voters, we're not going to be as oppositional as perhaps you've perceived us before, But ask yourselves the question, is your life better now than it was a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? Like, that seems to be the message now that they're driving home versus what we might have heard even 2 months ago.
Yeah, that's a big shift, right? And it's different to hear someone like Poilievre say that, because we've heard his song and dance in the past around trying to pin things on Trudeau and trying to pin things on the carbon tax. And I think he's finally maybe shifting to say, hey, Carney's been around for the last year almost now. How do I pivot on that front? So I think there is a shift in tone. We've heard multiple Conservative strategists come out and say that there needs to be a tie-in to what's happening here domestically to the U.S. and trying to find a way to pivot on that front. So I think maybe that has clued in and clicked in with him and how he communicates. And I think maybe we're going to see more of that. And I think a lot of the performativeness around this meeting, around Jivani going to the U.S., all these bits and pieces is their attempt to show that they're looking at the bigger picture than just some comms lines.
Last 30 seconds to you, Seb.
Listen, I think it's a great day for Canada when the leader of the opposition extends an effort to the Prime Minister to have a constructive dialogue about things that can be improved. I think that's really what we need to look at. I know Sharon and Laura perhaps are seeing this from a more malicious perspective, but I think let's take a step back. Let's see at what Mr. Poilievre has offered to Prime Minister Carney, and I think let's look forward to those fruitful results and perhaps move the country in a bit of a more conservative direction so that Canadians suffer ever so slightly less.
Ladies, it's hard to know. Are you magnanimous or are you malicious? It's a tough, it's a tough one. Thanks to our front bench. Appreciate it as always, guys. Sharon Carr, Jamie Ellerton, Sebastian Skamsky, and Laura D'Angelo. We'll take a quick break, and we're back in just a moment here on Power Play.
I sincerely hope that mine is just one of many portraits of prime ministers from both parties that will continue to be hung here for decades and centuries to come. But that will require that in these perilous times, both parties, whatever their other differences, come together against external forces that threaten our independence and against domestic policies that threaten our unity. We must preserve Canada, this country handed down to us by Providence, preserved by our ancestors, and held in trust for our descendants. We must make any sacrifice necessary to preserve the independence and the unity of this blessed land.
Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, they're urging political parties to work together for the sake of national unity. Harper's in Ottawa this week for celebrations marking 20 years since he and the Conservatives formed government. Yesterday, his official portrait was unveiled, and tonight there is a gala dinner honoring his time spent in office. Former colleagues of his, from cabinet ministers to MPs to senior staff, and even politicians of different stripes, including former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, are in the nation's capital for the events. Among those who are here is Derek Burney. He served as a political strategist to Harper on foreign policy and trade and played a key role in the transfer of power from Prime Minister Paul Martin's Liberals to Harper's Conservatives. Burney was also Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Brian Mulroney and served as former Canadian ambassador to the United States from 1989 to 1993. Hi, Mr. Burney. It is such a joy to see you here in studio. Thanks for making the time.
I'm happy to be here in my Ottawa uniform.
Yes, very much so. I wanted to start off just on your reflections as you go through these days of meeting people that you were working with for decades ago. What the experience has been like? What's the walk down memory lane like?
Well, it's been terrific because I haven't seen these people, many of them, in almost 20 years. But it was good to see so many of them still here, number one. And everybody has, great memories of what it was like serving that government. I was fortunate to be in at the very beginning. The first 2 weeks between the election and the swearing in of the government is a pretty frantic time, trying to put a team together, put a cabinet together. What the transition team did, Vashi, was we had a day-by-day plan for the Prime Minister in order to get the job done within 12 days. Keep in mind, the Americans take 3 months to do a transition. We do ours in 2 weeks. So you're under a lot of pressure to deliver. But so we had to interview candidates for the cabinet, and then we had to get them vetted, by the RCMP and other tax folks. And then we proposed a structure to restructure the cabinet committees because they've become very bloated under Paul Martin. And so we slimmed them down. We slimmed the cabinet down remarkably. Of course, it grew back up like a topsy. I mean, that
Weren't you a big proponent, if I remember reading right, of slimming the size of the cabinet specifically?
Absolutely. It should never be above 20. If the Americans can get by with 10, why do we need 45? I mean, it doesn't make sense. But it's jobs for the boys and girls. But no, we started off slim because nobody had previous cabinet experience. Nobody. We had two that had provincial government experience, John Baird and Jim Flaherty, and that was a big asset because any kind of government qualifies. But the rest, we were picking people that nobody really knew.
What about Stephen Harper himself, right? This is the election, the first election that he won. He had obviously not been prime minister before. Take us behind the curtain a little bit about what that was like.
Well, he was demanding, as you might expect. I didn't expect him to go through the mandate letters for each minister word for word, but he did. And I had to listen to all the comments he had to make, and then we had to make revisions to satisfy him. But the interesting part was he, in the middle of the 2004 campaign, I got a call from his then chief of staff, Tom Flanagan. He said, look, we might just win this thing. They weren't planning to win. And they weren't ready. They didn't have a transition team. So he said, I've got Huey Siegel and myself and you. Can we put something together in the next 3 weeks? Because it was only 3 weeks away from the election. So that's how I first actually got to meet Mr. Harper, because we presented a briefing to him at that time. And then after that election, he almost immediately said, look, we've got to be ready for the next one. So let's do it in a more structured manner. And so that's how we put the team together and went from there.
I'll fast forward 20 years to last night,
Yeah.
and you were there in the room as the portrait was unveiled, and you listened to the comments from both Prime Minister Carney and former Prime Minister Harper. We started this segment off with that very poignant moment at the end of Prime Minister Harper's speech, where he appealed to everyone's sense of unity while we face an external threat. What did you think of that?
I thought it was one of the most positive opportunities for all Canadians that I've seen in my entire government career. It was excellent. Both prime ministers spoke eloquently, positively about Canada and what Canada needed to do to keep together, keep united, to deal with the external challenges. It was a pretty good euphemism for you-know-who, and all the internal pressures. No, I thought it was a magnificent event. I would hope that many Canadians will get to see it. I hope that Canadian students will watch it carefully, because it was the most powerful pro-Canada message that you could hear, and it was great. The audience loved it.
Yeah, particularly from two prime ministers of different parties.
Well, they were saying the same. They were singing in the same, whatever. They were singing the same song.
Yeah.
Talking about national unity, talking about external pressures, talking about the challenges of being a prime minister of Canada. This is a very difficult country to govern. It's big and very diverse. I know that from my own experience with Mr. Mulroney. So it was a magnificent expression of Canadian positive views. That's why I think it was a great tonic for the country.
I hate to inject any sense of realism beyond that, but we are facing an extreme challenge south of the border, and particularly this year with the review of CUSMA. We know some of the sort of processes are in place, but we also have, in combination with that, very incendiary rhetoric coming from the White House on a number of fronts, but even as it pertains to CUSMA. If the government were to ask you, what's your advice? What do we do this year? What would you tell them?
My first point would be no deal is better than a bad deal. So in other words, we don't have to show any eagerness to conclude a new deal. We only can conclude a deal that's going to be good for Canada. So we have to be very firm on that point. We have to make sure that the American businessmen who rely on Canada's exports in order to survive start speaking up. They've been very quiet so far. I mean, the auto executives are the classic example. They've been almost mute. I would love to see some of the Asian, European partners decide to invest in the Canadian auto sector. I think that would be the best tonic for CUSMA that you could get. I similarly would like to see some defense expenditures made to either Europeans or Asian allies, just to serve notice that we're not exclusively reliant on the United States for defense, because we shouldn't be. I mean, why would we trust them on a thing as sensitive as defense in terms of procurement, when at any moment they could shut off the technology, for all you know, the way they're behaving these days. So I think, most of all, keep our cool. Don't be stampeded into a bad agreement. We're going to see a decision, hopefully, from the Supreme Court on the tariffs. And if they don't throw them out, they're certainly going to raise questions about them because they're totally illegal. I mean, why would you negotiate a new agreement with a country that's already broken the one we've got? I mean, we can't get around that. We should have learned the lesson that they can't be trusted. This administration cannot be trusted.
What is the implication of that for the approach that we take going into this? Like, should we be taking a harder line?
It's not a question of taking a harder line. We know what we want. We know what they want from us. We have to make decisions about whether we're prepared to make concessions on the things that they're pressing on, whether it's supply management or dairy access. We have to make balanced decisions about that. We have to be able to demonstrate to the Canadian public that we got something in return, not just a renewal on their terms, but a renewal that is a mutual advantage. If it isn't mutually advantageous, it's not worth it.
I'm going to leave it on that note. Mr. Burney, a pleasure as always. Thanks for your insights.
Good to see you.
It's Derek Burney, former Canadian ambassador to the U.S. We'll take a quick break. We've got our takeaway next. Stay right there. Welcome back to Power Play. Our takeaway comes from our interview with Federal Energy Minister Tim Hodgson. I had asked him about Chinese state-owned enterprises following the Prime Minister and his trip to China, and an MOU signed between Canada and China, allowing for more essentially two-way investment between the two countries in the area of energy. And I asked him about Chinese state-owned enterprises because all the way back in the late of 2012, I believe, the Harper government at the time had approved the takeover of Nexen by a company called CNOOC, but said after that, taking over a company in the oil sands by a state-owned company is banned. So I asked the minister, is that still the case?
We will look at every investment from every country against the Investment Canada Act. And we will accept investments that are a net benefit to Canada.
So not ruling out explicitly the idea of a Chinese state-owned company, and I did ask in multiple instances, taking over, for example, or having a majority stake in a company in the oil sands. But that Investment Act, of course, is also something that's been used for a number of years now to figure out exactly what would be a net benefit for Canada. I'll leave Power Play there. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Vashti Kapelos. Have a wonderful rest of your night.